everyone. I'm here with Hollywood actress and autism advocate Tal Anderson. How are you doing today, Tal?
Doing good. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, thank you. So, full disclosure, my aunt introduced me to Tal's mom, who then contacted Tal about this podcast. Um, and here on this podcast, I practice what I preach, and that's accommodations, right? And so, full disclosure, I did send the questions to Tal um, to begin with to get her approval on them and to allow her processing time to fully process the questions and what they mean. I know I appreciate that if I were to go into an interview of any kind. Um, so, yeah, we are perfectly able to accommodate that for anyone in the future who may be interested in coming on the podcast. So Tal has been a part of a few Hollywood projects, right?
Mhm.
Most recently, you may have seen her on the Pitt. She was in two episodes so far. Her first appearance was via video on the phone with um, the girl who plays her sister, Dr. Melissa King. She plays Becca King on there.
Taylor
Um,
Dearden. Taylor Dearden is her name.
yeah, Taylor. I had it up on IMDb, but I've got two screens and I can't flash back before between the two. Um, yeah, Taylor Dearden, um, which I thought she did a great job on there, and you did as well. For the brief times that we got to see you on there,
Yeah,
um,
yeah.
what you may recognize Tal for is probably the Netflix series Atypical, right? And you played a pretty big role in the later seasons, right?
Yes.
Um, you also played on As We See It in two episodes as is it Gia?
Gia, yes.
Okay. And then an episode of Magnum PI as Becca. Um,
Yes.
and then Wild Wild West Hollywood. I have not actually seen that yet, but it
It's
says you were in 19 episodes as Tal. Does that mean you were playing yourself like
yes.
a
Yes. That was my web series.
okay, okay. So, and you're also currently doing a podcast, right? A horror podcast?
Yes. It's called Harry Yarns, and we tell very creepy stories based on urban legends and myths.
Awesome. I'm gonna have to pick your brain sometime about that because I love urban legends and all that. So
Mhm.
we'll go ahead and get started with question number one, if that's okay with you.
Yes.
All right. When did your family begin to believe you might be autistic?
From what I've been told, the very first sign from my mom that something wasn't right was when she noticed that I would fall over and not try to brace my fall as an infant. I guess that's a natural reflex for babies, and I didn't have it. I mean, she didn't suspect anything, but she couldn't look away from me when I was sitting up because she was afraid I would hit my head. So it turns out that this was a major red flag for development. And they didn't diagnose me with anything, but they started to watch me and run tests. They eventually gave me a diagnosis of hypotonia, which is low muscle tone, and something called PDDNOS, which was like a general developmental delay.
Okay. What traits did you begin to present? Um, I guess you did kind of answer that, but what other traits did you present like later on that really kind of made it clear that, hey, autism might be a thing here?
Um, I didn't actually speak until I was almost 4 years old, and I think that was the major one. I was also very hyper and fixated on things I enjoyed, and I was solitary, and I didn't make friends very easily. Also, my brother, who is a year younger than me and also autistic, had been diagnosed already like two. So they were watching everything we both did, I guess. But my brother's behaviors were different from mine and were more stereotypically autistic. Like, for example, he liked to stare at the wheels on his Hot Wheels cars, and he talked in a really high voice, and he was echolalic. So I would play with him and give him the words to say like a script. He's no longer like that, and is super communicative. But as a kid, he he was completely in his own world. Fun fact: I have two younger brothers, and they're both neurodivergent. One's autistic like me, and the youngest has nonverbal learning disorder. But also, we were all adopted from different birth families as babies. So my parents didn't know any of us were neurodivergent before the adoptions.
Yeah, that's really interesting how that happens. They say that as neurodivergents, we tend to gravitate towards other neurodivergents, and that almost seemed to happen
Mhm.
naturally for you guys since you were adopted, and is almost like your parents kind of gravitated towards neurodivergent children.
Mhm.
That's really interesting.
Uh, yeah,
Um,
it is interesting.
so how how old were you when you actually received the autism diagnosis?
Um, I was diagnosed with a developmental delay at like 10 months old, and then with ASD officially at 4 years old.
Okay.
But I didn't know about it until my parents told me at about age 14 or 15.
So that leads me to a question that's not listed. Did you feel that you not knowing until you were 14 or 15 um, hindered you at all? Do you think that um, you could have maybe done something different or whatever if you had known earlier?
You know, not at all. No, not at all.
Okay, good deal.
I,
Um,
you know, I've always known I was different, I guess. I mean, I had a lot of therapists. I went to a really small private school through middle school, and I never felt bad or self-conscious about being different and never really questioned it. Once I found out in high school that my disability was actually autism, my only reaction was to research it. I remember feeling like, oh, yeah, I must be autistic because I have these traits. But also, it wasn't like finding out that I had a fatal disease or something. I just accepted it. I never had a problem with it. I really didn't. And I still don't.
that's awesome. Like, yeah, growing up, I knew I was different also.
Mhm.
I got assessed so many times. One time was by the school counselor or school psychologist, and when I was in fifth grade, and they came back with generalized anxiety disorder and depression, and I was the reason I was being bullied. And
Oh.
then in my 20s, again, diagnosis of generalized anxiety disorder, depression. Um, And then in my 30s, again, generalized anxiety disorder and depression. It wasn't until I was 41 years old last year, actually, that I received my autism diagnosis. And I do often wonder if I would have gotten my diagnosis early on, if I would have been bullied as severely as I was,
Mhm.
or maybe if I would have been bullied more severely because there was actually a name for why I was different.
Mhm.
Kids back in those days could be horrible. And unfortunately, when I was first assessed by the school psychologist, it was when the DSM-4 had just came out. So she was still operating off of the DSM-3 criteria, which is when autism came into the DSM
Mhm.
in 1980.
Mm-hmm.
And this was back in 1994, I think, when I was assessed the first time. And then the second time I was assessed, the DSM-4 was still in play, and yet I still didn't receive a diagnosis. It took me actually advocating for myself and coming across several videos on TikTok of other autistics and um, pinpointing traits they have with myself, and then me doing research myself, and then coming up with this big packet of papers of traits I have and co- uh, coordinating them with the diagnostic material and taking that to the assessment with me to be like, hey, I know I've got autism. I just need you to assess me for it and give me an official diagnosis, which I got, you know.
Do you think schools are better about identifying where kids could use support these days?
Some are, some aren't.
Mm.
Some of the smaller Midwestern schools um, with like less than 1,000 students, those are fairly good and they're very accommodating.
Mhm.
Some of the larger inner city schools, though, still need a lot of work. There are teachers who still live by the motto of do as you're told, um, and all this. I kind of found some of that in my work as an autism advocate. There was a school that um, actually abused autistic children. Um, the entire school district, really, and they weren't willing to accept the autism diagnosis, and they try to cover it up and all this. Um,
That's
yeah,
terrible.
yeah, it really is. And I'm glad I wasn't bullied to that extent in school, but I did receive my fair share of bullying from students where I would get physically beat up, left school with concussions, stuff like that. And the teachers weren't much better, saying that I was the reason I was being bullied. Um, so yeah, I just wondered that about your own personal experience um, of being diagnosed early on.
Mhm.
So, um, when did you begin to accept the fact that you're autistic? I know you said you were diagnosed early on and then you found out at 14, 15 years old. But how old were you when you finally accepted it?
I accepted it immediately once I was told.
Okay. What was it that made you accept it? Just the fact that you knew you were different?
Well, yes, yes.
Okay. Um, Tell me a little bit about some of the sensory difficulties you have.
Do you mean now?
Now or before, whichever you would like to talk about.
Okay. Well, for one, I'm a germaphobe, so I mean, it's not so bad that I have to wear gloves everywhere, but I am very aware of germs around me and germs left behind other people. I wear masks in public places most of the time. I also have an irrational distaste for cigarettes, cigars, and vapes. I'm not sure really why, but I think it's because I don't like smoke in general. And I'm sure I had a bad experience as a kid walking or standing by someone smoking or holding a cigarette in my face or something. I still hate cigarettes and smoke. Actually, my sense of smell is pretty sensitive in general. Also, it's not a huge sensitivity, but I greatly dislike scratchy sweaters or glittery sequined ones especially. If it touches my skin, and I hate glitter stuck on my skin.
Being you're an that you're an actress, Um, do any of the costume departments do you have to relay that to the costume departments, or do you ever find that they kind of make you wear something that you don't really agree with?
They always ask me actually,
Good,
and they always ask me actually. They're great.
good. Um, I just wanted to check in with you real quick before we move on. Would you like a break at all, or are we good to continue?
We're good to continue.
Okay. If at any point you need a break, just let me know, okay?
Okay.
All right. Um, so how do burnout, shutdown, and meltdown present for you?
You know, burnout for me can happen, but it mostly ends in exhaustion. If I've been like crazy busy and have to fly over all over the place and had a deadline, etc., all at once, I'll always push through it until everything is done. But I need calories and sleep to recover from it. I don't think I experienced the typical autistic burnout or meltdowns in my life that people describe, but I do get pretty emotional and affected by intense circumstances. Um, I have, I have had episodes though where I haven't been able to manage my emotions without intervention. But weirdly enough, they've happened while I was working, acting. Once in a scene, once in a scene for a film I was in, for example, everyone in the room was screaming at each other. And my character's response was a meltdown. And when the director said cut, I couldn't turn it off. I think it took two brownies to get me to come out of character. um, something similar happened on the Atypical set and also on the As We See It set. And both times, it took sugar to snap me out of character.
So sugar is kind of a reverse trigger for you almost.
Yeah.
So almost like medicine for the meltdown.
Right.
Okay. I'll have to remember that. See if in the comments below, anyone watching, is sugar a reverse meltdown for you? Is it medicine for your meltdowns? Let us know in the comments below. Or what are things that help you when you're in meltdown? Let us know. Um, so tell me a little bit about how you process information on a good day, and then how you process information on a not so good day.
Um, to be honest, I don't think there's a difference. Or if there is, I haven't had a bad enough day to have experienced it yet. I do have a processing disorder also, so in general, my processing is always challenged. So, maybe that's why I don't notice a difference. I think the most I can say is that some days I'm more exhausted, so maybe I need sleep on bad days.
So, kind of staying on topic a little bit, when you do reach that burnout, shutdown, meltdown point and everything, how many days do you find that you need to um, kind of recover your spoons before you're ready to go again?
Hmm. Um, what I'm saying is that I really haven't gone through that.
Okay. Okay. And so it just came up. I don't mean to go off the questions. I know that can kind of be a struggle for me too. Just questions come up that I feel like kind of may need answered at that time. Um, so many in the neurodivergent community end up identifying with special or specific alternative subcultures like goth and punk. Was there a subculture that you had identified as or with growing up?
I didn't actually, but also, my whole life was spent in really small private educational environments. And, until high school, I only had three kids in my school, and one of them was my brother. And so I moved to a bigger private high school, but it was still really small with only about 50 kids, so it wasn't a very typical environment. I mean, I guess maybe if I had gone to a public high school, I might have found my way to the theater kids and may have been part of the drama kids subculture. I don't know.
I could see that. See you maybe in all black with a black beret.
Yeah.
So you went to school for production, correct?
Yes, I did.
How did that lead to a career as an actress?
Well, after graduating from high school, I went to Full Sail University and got my BS in film. But this came after I had already started acting. In high school, I started taking a few private acting classes, taking acting locally in Florida. First in a few plays at a local repertory theater, and then in some independent short films. I also worked privately with an acting coach from about age 15. So the plan was always to act. In film school, I learned that I had a talent for film editing, and now I work as a freelance film editor when I'm not on set. I'm really, really glad to have the film production knowledge and skills I learned in college because, not only can I produce my own work, but understanding what happens behind the camera makes me a much better and more prepared actor.
That's great. Yeah, I used to do my own short horror films myself, and you don't really realize what all goes into a production until you find yourself behind the camera and then in front of the camera and then in the editing room, and how different things can affect the final outcome. Like with the movie studio software I was using, um, it would take so long to edit that I would have to make the movie. Before I realized I could just save it, I would have to click make movie and then come back and edit more and keep doing that. And it really, really interfered with the quality of the film. It's very pixelated after all that. And it's interesting knowing what I know now, looking back at some of my early short films and knowing where went wrong and where I could have improved a lot more. What exactly was it that got you interested in film?
Um, you know, I've been a storyteller my whole life, so, I knew early on I wanted to work in the entertainment industry. I started using the computer really young, and, I remember writing scripts that included myself interacting with my favorite characters from various shows and movies. I'd act them out and film them on my little flip video camera. Um, I also had like three of these little Panasonic handheld audio recorders, and I could record all the characters' lines on them and then combine them to follow the script. I was a filmmaker before I even knew what that was. Um, but later, that just developed into me watching films of all kinds and reading stories, especially biographies about real people. This naturally brought me to learning to make films properly.
So, a little off script. Do you have a favorite film?
Oh, I have a lot. Um, the original Nightmare on Elm Street.
Okay. I actually got to hang out with one of the stars of Nightmare on Elm Street 3 and 4 back in October. Uh, Ken Sagos.
Ken Sagoes, yeah, Kincaid.
Yeah. He was pretty cool. He was really nice. Um, he hardly anyone came to the convention we were at, and he let my daughter pick out a poster any size, and he autographed it for her and took a picture with her and everything, no charge. And he he's working on a comic book right now, where the proceeds go to sending inner city kids to camp. Um, he was supposed to send me the link to the GoFundMe, and I never got the link. I tried emailing him a couple times requesting it, and haven't heard back from him. But if anybody on here knows Ken Sigos, have him send me the link to the GoFundMe so I can help with
Yeah.
that. Um, so you like the original Nightmare on Elm Street? Are there any others that aren't in the horror genre?
300.
Okay, what'd you like
Yeah,
about 300?
just the style, the cinematography. I'm a big, big, big history buff. So, a combination of just comic books and history all coming all together in this one movie is just so cool.
Yeah, I thought it was pretty interesting the way they did it when it came out. It was really groundbreaking in a lot
Yeah.
of ways. You mentioned comic books. Are you a comic book fan?
Oh, yes, absolutely.
Who's your favorite comic book character?
Loki.
Loki? Okay. I just actually picked up a few comic books myself at the store. I got
Oh, that's
a
really
couple trade
cool.
paperbacks, X-Men, Extreme
Wow.
X-Men. Um,
Wow.
well, that one my brother-in-law gave me for Christmas. It's a reprint of the first issue of Green Lantern.
Wow, that's really,
Um,
really.
Guy Gardner taking over as Green Lantern.
I also have all of the original 80s Transformers comics.
Oh, nice. I'm a big Green Lantern fan myself. I haven't really collected a lot lately. I've got like 5 long boxes up in my bedroom full of comics.
Mhm.
Um, just running out of room, and being in my master's program right now, I don't really have a whole lot of time to sit down and read comics. But
Right.
hopefully, once I graduate in December, I'll have a little bit more time. So let's see. Do you feel that it's more difficult for actors with disabilities to get roles?
Um, the simple answer is yes, but these days it's incredibly hard for any actor to get a role. And anytime you're a specific type of actor of any kind, it makes it even harder. Um, so first of all, disabled roles and disabled characters are not common. But right now, while production is slow in Hollywood, those roles are even more scarce. Secondly, there is a mindset out there that you only go looking for disabled actors when you require, a disabled actor to fill a disabled role. You know, I don't think it's in the front of many casting directors' minds to audition a disabled actor for a non-disabled role, unless it's specifically requested for the production. There's always exceptions, and there are casting directors who advocate for specific disabled actors that they're familiar with to be considered for non-disabled roles. Like everything else, I feel like it's an uphill battle though. It's funny because as a disabled actor, I advocate for authentic representation on screen, right? So if there's a crowd of people on a college campus, for example, at least 40% of them should have a disability, in my opinion. But at the same time, I also, advocate for producers and casting to consider disabled actors in a general pool of actors who are just, qualified for the role, whether the character is disabled or not. I think it's an example that both those things can be true and important at the same time. And as an underrepresented community, disabled actors don't get a fair and equal amount of opportunities, just like other underrepresented communities of, like communities of color, for example.
Yeah, we just aren't there yet. Just like in the early days of Hollywood and the 20th century and everything, um, they would have white actors play other cultural parts, um, which is really getting dumped on nowadays with the whole blackface thing. That's how it was back in those days. Was it wrong? Yes. But that's how it was back then. And should more disabled actors get a fair shot? Absolutely. But we can't fault Hollywood for um casting. Sorry, that's my autism at work, is the whole processing thing. Casting actors that fit what they want. You
Right.
know, the last thing really on a writer or director's mind is this going to be good representation? No, the main thing they're focusing on is this character being portrayed the way I want it portrayed? Is it
I'm,
would it in an ideal world? Yeah, I would love for a disabled actor to play a disabled character,
you know,
but you know,
I don't think it's the last thing, but they definitely are writing the story first.
right, yeah. And while I do understand where a lot of the autistic and disabled population is coming from with wanting m- more representation in Hollywood, I can also understand where the directors and the writers and the producers and the actors are coming from as well. And I think that's something very important that our society needs to take into consideration.
Right.
As an actress who's also autistic, would you like to play a non autistic character someday? What do you think you could bring to such a character?
I have been in roles where the character was not autistic, but had another disability. Like, for example, I had a guest role on a TV show where my character had a mental illness and was in a live-in mental health facility. I also played a character who had Tourette syndrome. So having the opportunity to play a non-disabled character in general would also be something I love to do, but the reason for that may not be what people expect. I think a lot of disabled actors want to avoid being pigeonholed into certain types of roles or overlooked because they may be perceived as being incapable of portraying a non-disabled character. In some ways, I get that because, we're constantly having to prove our competence. But for me, playing a non-disabled character is just another version of taking on a role where the character's perspective is much different than my personal one, which just means that it's a challenge for me as an actor because I have to research and learn and observe and, incorporate all of that into the role. It's my job. And, challenges are actually the best part of that job. If I just wanted to be myself on screen, I'd make TikTok videos of myself talking about my life. Um, but that's not what I want to do. I want to be a superhero or a supervillain or an alien or a life-saving surgeon or a kindergarten teacher. I want to research and become a historical figure like Mary Tyler Moore or Shelley Duvall and portray their stories on screen. And what I can bring to those characters is hopefully what any disciplined and serious actor can bring to a role, which is to put in the time and effort to understand the character and become a champion for that character's right to exist and to defend that character's point of view. As an autistic actor, I don't really bring anything unique to portraying a non-autistic character other than, amazing research skills, a pretty fierce work ethic, and a high level of commitment and attention to detail.
Since you mentioned TikTok, I know this wasn't on the questions list, Again, this is one of those questions that just kind of pop up as we're conversing. What do you think about the people who say, who have a problem with people looking at autism TikTok videos and then self-diagnosing off of one video?
Hmm. Let me think about that. You know, um, I think you have to do what you have to do. Um, because, um, access, um, because access to diagnosis is hard. Um, um,
Okay, take your time.
because, access to diagnosis access to diagnosis is hard, and some people need help with it.
I completely agree. I just did a video on my TikTok this morning, because somebody commented that self-diagnosis isn't valid. And I had to respond with, no, it is valid because, access their insurance companies don't want to pay for adult autism assessments. Um, Plus, there isn't the clinicians who want to offer adult autism assessments. I had to drive over an hour and a half to um, Illinois State University for some um, psychiatric students to do my assessment. It was signed off by an actual psychiatrist, but and then if insurance isn't wanting to cover it, like they didn't with me because it was a school doing it, it's anywhere between 500 to 1400, or no, I want to say about $7,000 almost, um, for uninsured individuals to get an assessment. And then you have these clinicians who are relying on the old DSMs. Maybe that's what they learned off of, and they haven't really quite translated into the new DSMs and the criteria. So you have these older doctors who are operating off of DSM-4, maybe even DSM-3 criteria, and plus you have all the stigma around autism, people using terms like profound autism, um, which isn't a diagnosis at all. That it made one appearance in the DSM, and that was back in DSM-1 in 1952. And then um, people like RFK Jr. touting the whole vaccine thing. Um, and so much misinformation around autism that a lot of doctors are respouting, you know. Um, Going back to the profound autism thing, they're not making it clear that autism and intellectual disabilities are two completely different disabilities. And they're almost making it out to be one thing, with the term like profound autism.
Right.
And I think we need, as a society, we need to do better. Our schools don't even offer programs that educate around autism or neurodivergence. In my undergrad, I took special education classes, psychology, sociology, and even a neuroscience class. And I can count on one hand how many lectures I sat through that even mentioned autism. And now
Right.
in my graduate school program, um, with working on my master's in counseling, they don't touch on it at all. I've had to go out of my way to bring it up in classes, to educate my classmates about autism, and even some of the instructors about autism. So I think we as a society, as a culture, need to do a lot better.
Also, watching a TikTok video and identifying to what is being said is the first step in awareness, but The other thing is that as an adult, after you go through all of that, what is left? You are autistic, but what is the difference between having a piece of $6,000 paper or you just suspect that you're autistic? I mean, your life doesn't change.
Right. Real quick, I want to show the audience at home what an autism diagnosis actually looks like. This is what an adult autism diagnosis actually looks like. That's basically what you're spending thousands of dollars on, is just a
Mhm.
few sheets of paper that go through and talk about what criteria you meet to receive the diagnosis and a couple signatures. Um, this is a childhood autism diagnosis. This is my son's. And it almost makes you wonder, is it really worth it to spend that much money on a piece of paper when you could do the research yourself? So, back to talk about Hollywood.
Mhm.
You've been in a number of projects like we've talked about. Um, Atypical, which I thought was great. I didn't discover Atypical until earlier this year, and I binged watched it, um, which I thought the representation in that series was spot on in a lot of ways. Were some areas over dramatized? Sure, but it's Hollywood. Everything's going to be a little over dramatic. Um, and then most recently, The Pit, which I just finished a couple weeks ago, um, which I thought was amazing. My wife is a nurse, and used to work in the ICU at the hospital, and she caught part of an episode, and she asked me, "So when you finish this season, do you get a degree in uh, nursing?" Because it was just so accurate. So, how was your time working on the pit, and what other projects have you been in?
I'm so proud to be part of the pit. The writing is very good. Taylor Dearden is who plays my sister is really, really amazing, and the people are fantastic. Um, as for what other projects I've been in, as you had mentioned hours ago, I was also in the Prime Video television series As We See It. I also guest starred on an episode in season 5 of the NBC series Magnum PI, which was awesome because they filmed in Hawaii and it was my first time in Hawaii, so that was fun. I also played Tina in the English dub version of the Disney Plus series Teen Chocolate. And in addition to those, I've been in several independent shorts.
Okay. You also run that podcast we were talking about earlier.
Yeah. Yes.
Um, do you want to tell us a little bit about your podcast? I know it wasn't on the list of questions, but I thought this would be a good chance for you to kind of shout that out.
So Harry Yarns is a podcast hosted by me and my co-host Kayla Cromer, who was on Everything's Gonna Be Okay. And what we do on the show is we tell creepy stories based on real life occurrences, legends, and myths. Um, and then after we tell the story, we tell the actual story of the thing of this specific occurrence or legend that the story is based on. It's a lot of fun.
What made you decide to start that podcast?
Well, um,
It's okay, take your time.
well, um, Kayla and I wanted to do something together. And and we thought about a web series. Um, we thought about a web series, but we thought, you know, uh, but we thought, um, the podcast would be less work actually, but it's not. um, yeah.
Podcasts are a lot of work. I know I used to do a true crime podcast on one of my other channels and just researching the topic, plus doing all the editing and everything, and trying to facilitate the discussion. It's more work than what you think.
Yeah, but if you listen to Harry Yarns though, the podcast, we act out the story. So it's like listening to a short film. The issue is that there is no video, so you have to so we have to tell the story with sound. So I edit them, I act in them, and the sound editing is intense. And it's so much work. Uh yeah.
Um, so, what are your thoughts regarding how autistics are portrayed in media and the general public's image of autistics because of it?
Um, I- you know, I think it's a work in progress. Like pretty much everything in life. The existence of autistic characters used to be zero, and then it wasn't. But it also wasn't great representation. I think that now we definitely see more autistic stories and characters than we ever did. But those characters are still written as token representation more than for authenticity. Don't get me wrong, it's definitely better than no representation, but I think it would be a lot better if the autistic character didn't have to represent all autistic people and have every stereotypical autistic behavior jammed into one character. You know, I don't think writers have figured out that it's okay to have the character be uniquely them and also autistic because that's how it is in real life. This is why this is why I appreciate being part of the pit. The way autism is portrayed in the show is more encompassing. I play the twin sister of an ER doctor. We're both neurodivergent, but my character requires way more support. There was also another autistic character who was a patient in the ER, and his character was also very different from the two King sisters. So within the overall story of the season, they show three neurodivergent adults who are all very different. The characters weren't just human bags filled with autistic stereotypes. They're complete people whose autistic traits are just a part of who they are as a whole. And, that's the way it should be on screen.
Yeah, I like that. And when I first watched The Pit, and what brought me to it was it was a TikTok clip. It was that scene with Dr. King and the autistic patient. Um, and I thought the portrayal there was amazing. It was amazingly accurate, more accurate than I had seen in um, Hollywood productions in ever, really. Um, Atypical got really close. Um, there have been a few others that got pretty close, but I thought that in that clip from the pit, it not only demonstrated the autistic experience from two different perspectives. Um, and I say that because, and I know you can't say anything about this. You did say that Dr. King is neurodivergent. I suspect that she is autistic. I'm sure a lot of other people suspect she's autistic, um, maybe with lower support needs. Um, but it really shows how much effort the crew, the writers, the production, um, and the actors put into developing these characters. Um, and it shows that there is no one size fits all autism. You know, we often hear that you can't be autistic because someone I know somebody who's autistic, who you're nothing like them, um, from so many people out there. And this that episode and others in the season really showed that there are differences among autistic people. Um, Similarly, where there's differences in neurotypical and holistic people, you know, that show proves how far we've come in representation.
Yeah.
And, just like back in the day where Hollywood thought that all black people acted the same or all Indians acted the same, um, or what all women acted the same, and look how far Hollywood has come in those aspects. I think Hollywood will get there. They just got to give them time, be a little bit more patient, and be more open to the different interpretations. Are there going to be some that rub people the wrong way with the uh, one size fits all approach? Yeah, but it's movie making, it's TV. They're gonna over dramatize stuff.
Yeah, the writers are great on the Pit, and they definitely get that credit. I see so many poorly written scenes of autistic characters, and playing this character in the Pit is a joy.
What changes would you like to see made by both the general public and the media when it comes to autism, such as representation, education, being more accommodating of autistic disabilities, and more understanding?
Um, That's never an easy question to answer. I think first of all, I wish people would stop spreading misinformation about autism. And I think to fix that, I'd really like to see people elevate autistic voices so that non-autistic people can learn from the source and stop making generalizations about autism based on what they see on TV. And I think one of the best ways to do that is to assume that, the autistic person you meet is competent to do whatever it is they are being asked to do. Too often, I think it's the opposite. People assume that all disabled people are helpless. As far as media representation goes, I think the biggest thing is that we usually only see one or two types of stereotypically autistic characters on screen. For true representation, I think we need to see more non-speaking autistic characters, more autistic adults who are living independently with support, more married autistic adults with children, and more adults who were diagnosed late in life. I think for non-autistic people who aren't exposed to autism, the only information they get is on screen. So it's important that they're shown a full view. Without that, the misinformation and stereotypes take over. But beyond that, I believe that everyone deserves to go to a movie or turn on the TV and see a character they can relate to. And especially children. Seeing someone you identify with on screen makes you feel seen and can make a huge difference in building self-esteem.
Well said. And that's the whole purpose of this podcast, is to show accurate representation of people with different disabilities, whether it be autism, whether it be schizophrenia. I interviewed a couple people with schizophrenia on here, whether it be somebody with substance use problems. It's really about ending the stigma and helping to improve understanding. And that's also part of why, while yes, I did provide you with the questions in advance, there were also some questions that were kind of thrown in there because they came up during our conversation. And it helped to show people that autistics aren't robots. You
Right.
know, autistics have different ways of processing. Um, you handled those questions like a champ. Um, I know that had to have been difficult, um, but I think um, it gave people a unique view of how differences in processing for neurodivergent individuals can be different. For me, the audience saw me stumble over my words occasionally, especially if it wasn't written down in the script, um, struggling to process what I wanted to say and everything. Which is why I try not to over edit these podcast videos. I try to upload them as is, maybe put an intro and an outro. Um, but I want accurate representation to help spread not only awareness, but acceptance and understanding. So, with that being said, I think we've come to the end of the questions I've given to you. Before I move on to one final question for you that wasn't in the script,
Yeah.
are there any questions you have for me?
Um, no.
Okay. So, the one final question I have for you, and this is a big one. What is your favorite role that you have played so far?
Oh, wow. My favorite role that I've played so far. Um, I loved Sid. I loved Sid playing Sid on Atypical, and it, I think it's because she was my first major role. Because she was my first major role I ever got in Hollywood. And the experience was, oh my goodness, it was so great. It was amazing. Um, the cast and crew welcomed me in, and we welcomed me in like family, and the whole experience and was great. And I'll never forget Sid.
That was a really great role, and the show itself was amazing. The fact that they got so many neurodivergent actors to play neurodivergent parts, um, and demonstrating the differences in the different neurodivergences and even the different autistics. Um, when I first watched it, I believe the very first episode. Um, I can't remember the characters' names now. I struggle with names. That's also part of. Um, but the sister. I know you can't confirm or deny. But I immediately took to Facebook and I was like, okay, she's got to be autistic too. She's just maybe undiagnosed, because she
You mean
presented.
Sam?
Yeah,
You mean
Sam's
Sam?
sister. Yeah,
Casey's her name.
Casey. Yeah. Um, I she presented so familiarly as undiagnosed autistic, and it made me wonder if she was written that way or if that was something that the actress brought to that character. And I don't expect you to answer that. I know you probably couldn't.
Uh,
Um,
I don't know if I agree with that, but that's very, very interesting. I don't think she was written that way, but that's a question for Rabia, Rabia Rashid, the showrunner.
yeah, and of course the mother demonstrated so many autistic traits as well with her daily planner that couldn't be interrupted, couldn't be messed with, or else she got upset about it and freaked out, and her own routines and everything. Just so great representation all the way around.
Yeah.
And I wish the show would have got a lot more love. I know it got a lot of love when it was out. I had never heard of it, and I'm kind of big into movies and TV shows, and I didn't hear about it until this year, and I regret that. I wish I could have enjoyed it as it came out, but at the same time, I'm also glad that I got to binge watch it and didn't have to wait for each episode or each season to come out.
Well, it's still available on Netflix, so that's a good sign that people are still watching it.
Yeah, and I just want to say, my aunt gave you huge props for that role, for your acting in it. She thought you did an amazing job.
Well, thank you. Thank you so much.
All right. Um, so before we end, is there anything else you'd like to say or add or anything like that?
Um, no.
All right, everyone. So this was my interview with Tal Anderson. You can check her out on the Pit. When should we expect season two to come out?
Um,
Probably next year.
probably probably next year, yeah.
Okay. Also Atypical. She's in the later seasons. Uh, an episode of Magnum PI, and As We See It, as well as so many other shows and movies. I hope to one day see your name on the Hollywood Walk of Stars.
Wow. Yeah. Yeah, thank you. Um, also listen to Harry Yarns. It's on Spotify, it's on all platforms.
I'll leave a link to that in the description below. So again, thank you, Tal, for coming on here.